Welcome, everybody. My name is Rui Faria, and I'm welcoming you on this first live with our office open for you. Well, what does this mean, and why are we here in this module, in this format for you, different than the previous ones that we did? I'm just going to say goodbye to all our followers that are seeing you, seeing us, and assisting us in this live, and that were also sharing in the Instagram. So thank you, guys. So sorry, yeah. Okay, so my name is Rui Faria, and I welcome you for this live that we prepared for you as being the first of this section, like we announced before. So, welcoming you in 2026. This is our first live of question and answers. Now, the reason why we're doing this on YouTube is in order to approach a different um, type of communication and being also able to explore and go deeper into subjects that you may have some questions and where we can actually be of um, help. So, just to introduce myself to you, my name is Rui Faria, and I've been working with water for more than 21 years. As a result of that, I've seen that although I try to do my best to get the best services and the best products to all of the clients that needed our services, although that gave me a lot of baggage and a lot of learning during that process, I came to the conclusion that I cannot do everything and that most of the questions stay without being answered. And so I'm facing every day questions and difficulties of so many people that don't really know how to approach a specific theme, a specific item, or something that their water needs to be attended. So, in order to have a big company with many multiple technicians doing all the work, I came to the conclusion that I may be better of service sharing some knowledge that I've been uh, learning in the last years, many due to some mistakes that I also made in the water treatment. So therefore, I wanted to become more of help in order to be giving the right answer to the right question according to the knowledge that we've been achieving so far. Now, the difference between this live and the other live that we still are going to do every last Thursday of each month, which is on Instagram, we do both in Portuguese and in English. But in this format here, we are going to exclusively transmit and do this live and to be live with you only in English. The reason, therefore, is because of our wide variety of people that are watching us through the world, all around the world. So, in order to create some confusion and going backwards and forwards, I decided, or the team decided, that it's better so that we keep in our English. But even if you have some questions, you can put it on the chat. You can put your questions directly in Portuguese, and we'll translate it. And if by any chance you would like us to have a direct approach with you in Portuguese, then we can do it after the live in any convenient time that we can coordinate with you, so that we can be at service in Portuguese as well. So we are going to continue. My name is Rui Faria, like I said. I'm 51 years old, and I'm feeling very young as I'm using these platforms to communicate with you and to receive your questions and to receive your feedback from directly from you in order to answer and to be of help. And what I've been seeing and watching in the last years is that there is a misconcept when it comes to having your own source of water. Well, when you are connected to the main grid, everything is actually handed up for you with the water quality that the councils and the cities and the government prepares and offers you. So you just have to open your tap, and happy days, the water is treated, is tested, and is useful and good for consumption. But that is not always the case for so many people that have to have their own water sources. So that means that when you have your own borehole or your own water facility, you need to have the treatment of that water according to the needs of the water and also according to the standards that you need to fulfill in order to have a safe water for consumption according to all of the requirements. Well, that is when it comes to a big construction of ideas. And one of the things that I very much come across is that many people achieve or purchase a water filtration or a water purification system and then end up with some side effects of that because not all of the aspects have been attended. So sometimes we end up with water that forms too much scale or that bites too much on the elements and the infrastructure where the water is being served, like pipes, faucets, surfaces, and even equipments. So that means that being aware that there are some nuances that we need to approach, that is one of the reasons why I'm using these platforms to reach out to you and say, be careful, just do some water tests and some water analysis, and specifically searching for certain indicators that can avoid some troubles in the future or even in the very close present. And one of the issues that I come across is that we see um, some damaging on the outside of some fittings, some parts, and that can indicate that the water is aggressive, that the water is not balanced. Well, that means that we have to have the right knowledge in order to start searching for the reasons for that subject. Well, one of the indexes and one of the physicians that discovered this phenomena is called Langelier. And so he created the saturation index of Langelier, the LSI, which can determine in advance or even after treatment if that water is corrosive or if it's incrustating, that becomes or forms scale. So if the water forms scale, then we are facing results like these ones. So we get our equipment built up with lime scale, or if the water is aggressive and corrosive, it can transform into these kind of scenarios. Either the one or the other are not good for our equipment and for our devices. So that means that we did something to the water that is not according to the balance of that index. And that index of Langelier is actually measured with a table that you can see that it's a calculation of some different subjects and some different points of interest that we can just have a lab to analyze all of these data and then combine and do the calculations. Some laboratories, they do this calculation by themselves, so you can just interpret if these results are according to the balanced water or not. So, and what to do? What can we actually interfere? What can we do in order to transform an aggressive water into a balanced water, or a scale forming water into a balanced water? So, if we know that all of these aspects, like the pH, the temperature, the calcium saturation, and the alkalinity, as well as the total dissolved solids, that they influence this index of Langelier, then we know what to do. And in order to have that mathematic formula calculated, there are many applications. I even have an application on my phone that can help us and indicate what we need to do in order to balance our water. So, if we have a situation that we need to create the optimum scenario for our water, then it's not that simple that we just hire a plumber or a company to come and install, for instance, just give you an idea, an ion exchange softener that will bring down the calcium rate. Well, if we know that we need to balance our calcium rate higher, but if we are bringing it down by having such an equipment, then we are becoming our water even more aggressive than it was before. And that can give some trouble in the measure equipment, to measure pH, to measure chlorine, or even in our own infrastructures, in our heating devices, or in the surfaces of or our equipment. So that is one of the reasons why we started off this question and answer. So feel free to use the chat to put the questions that you have, and also all of the other subjects that you would like to see answered or approached in this live. So just coming back to the organization or the way of doing of this live, I will try to answer on an immediate way all of the questions that you may have accordingly. And if there are some questions that we need to approach on a much deeper level that I will probably not be able to give you a direct or an immediate answer right away, we'll pass it on for a further contact, or we will approach it in our next live in this concept, which will be in the next month. Okay, so we are going to have these lives on YouTube for question and answer, and having our office open for you. So we are actually with you in our office, so that we can discuss the subjects that you would like to see discussed. And we will also be live with you approaching different themes, but then on our Instagram canal. So, hoping that you have a great 2026. We are starting off this series of lives on YouTube, so that you can contact with us in a better and a more direct way. I'm just seeing here a message. Have you ever had cases where the water meets all legal parameters but still causes problems in these facilities? Yes and no. The answer to that question, if I ever came across water that fulfills the standard needs and the legal parameters, that is one gray zone. Why is this a gray zone? Because what we've just been discussing here as the Langelier Index is not something that is required to be analyzed by the legal standards. What does this mean? This means that when somebody does a water treatment, and I've seen some cases like this, and they ask a laboratory, a certified laboratory, to do the chemical and the bacteriological test of the water that is being already treated, it can be so that the water is qualified as being okay for human consumption. But when we combine these configurations and when we ask for the Langelier Saturation Index, it can indicate us that the water has these problems. Now, how is this then possible? How do we have, on the one hand, the authorities or the laboratories attesting and certifying that the water is okay for consumption, but it's causing so much damage to our facilities and equipment? Well, the answer is simple. If I take a glass of water, well, this is not water, this is tea, green tea. But if I take a glass of water from the tap and I have it analyzed, all of the parameters that are in there have a minimum and a maximum. And that can all be okay for human consumption. But what happens is that the Langelier Saturation Index can indicate that that particular water in those conditions, and I must rephrase, and I'm always bringing back this tabel, because one of the lines that you see here is, for instance, temperature. The temperature, the factor of temperature, can influence the saturation index. So that means that if we are messing with the temperature of the water, and the temperature of the water when it gets to the lab is one, but in our taps it's different one. But also if the pH, for instance, it can be between 6.5 and 9.5 according to the World Health Organization to be good for consumption, for human consumption. But if that pH is interfering and making it so that the water becomes corrosive, then we have an issue. So answering to your question is yes, I've come across situations like this, and it's more often than what you are expecting. Because like I said, there are points that are analyzed individually, but the combination of those make it so that the water can become aggressive or corrosive. So thank you for your question. And just to summarize, answering to the question, if a water can be tested and fulfill the legal parameters and still be inadequate for the longevity of our equipment, the answer is yes. And that comes along very often. Okay. So going further on that question, what practical signs indicate that we are dealing with water that has a negative or positive Langelier test even without laboratory tests? Well, one of the aspects that we can have, or the symptoms that we can have, I'm going to show you because I have that on my phone. The beauty of these lives is indeed that we can interact in a direct way. So I'm going to show you what we can see. For instance, if we look at here we have a pipe where we can see a plastic, and there we have a brass, a metal element. And if we go closer, you can see that there is like a green, between green and gray, oxidation. And that oxidation is on the outside, not even on the inside. So that can indeed indicate that the water can have a problem. And that problem can be indeed be explained by a out of balance saturation index of Langelier. That was actually the question that this physician was given to give actually an answer, because he was working in a big company, and the water was fulfilling all of the lab requirements, legally lab requirements, but the pipe work was being ruined and it was being destroyed. So the investors asked them to find the reason. So he went to search, and he went to do all of the calculations and all of the possible thoughts. So if you have any curiosity about this, go and search for Langelier and what were the methods that he had to create and discover in order to come to this formula, which is this one. So the saturation index equals the pH plus the temperature factor, not the temperature, but the temperature factor, the calcium factor, the alkalinity factor, all added up, and then minus the total dissolved solids factor. So all of those factors are the calculations that Langelier created and was able to discover. And that is being very helpful to people like me when we are asked to give an answer to why is our equipment not working properly, why is there so much corrosion, why did I have to replace my washing machine so sudden, although I don't have calcium in my water. So that was one of the reasons why Langelier was asked to give an answer. Another question is, can two buildings in the same area have completely different problems even if they use water from the same supply? That is a complicated question, because if it's the same quality of the water and if they are in the same area, the only difference that I can oversee is if there are differences in the type of plumbing, in the type of pipes that have been used in that building itself. So that could interfere with the total dissolved solids, for instance, and also the temperature. As you could see, the temperature can influence this saturation index. So it's a difficult question, because we would need to have some more detailed information about what are the nuances on that particular water, so that it's affecting the one building but not affecting the other building. Sometimes there are buildings that have some old iron or copper pipes in their construction, and others are already using different materials for their pipework. So it could have some interference. But although the Langelier index is one aspect to take in consideration, there are others, which is, for instance, the galvanic corrosion. That is another subject, and that can have some influence as well. So even having the same water, the galvanic corrosion can also occur, and that can have some influence. But on the other side, if that building or one of the buildings has a water stock tank to assure the water pressure, and if that tank, which is just a holding tank with pressure pumps to then push the water up on the building, then it could interfere with some slight adjustments of some parts, especially the alkalinity of the water and the aggressiveness of that water. So that could interfere. But if you come across some real information or some real case like that, send us some more detailed information. Another question that we have is it possible to correct the Langelier syndrome? It's not a syndrome, by the way, it's a saturation index. Okay, just to give, it's not a syndrome. So is it possible to correct the Langelier Saturation Index without resorting to complex or expensive systems? The answer is difficult to give you right away because it depends on what we are dealing with. So if we have a water that needs a drastic correction on the, for instance, on the total dissolved solids, imagine that the water has a high mineralization or a very low mineralization, we need to do something on that subject. Or imagine that the water has a very high calcium rate and we need to lower that calcium rate. Then we need to have some equipment that will be able to reduce it up to a certain level that will balance. So it's a difficult answer to say if it's an expensive system or not an expensive system. Sometimes, if it's just a matter of slight adjustments, small adjustments, then the costs are not exaggerated. But if the water quality at the source is already problematic in a certain way, for instance, that we have a very high alkalinity and very low TDS, that can be asking for some high expenses. Yes. So thank you once more for all of those questions, and I hope that this is not becoming a big monster in your head. It's just so that you can be aware that not only we have to have a little bit of this awareness, this knowledge, but also that we shall not be afraid of it, as we know that there are some answers to it. And I've come across some installations where nobody spoke about this index. And when we ask a lab test to specifically calculate the index, then we see that the water is out of balance. And that brings the confirmation to our suspicions about what needs to be done. So another related question is, in older installations, is it more beneficial to protect against corrosion or scaling? Wow. Thank you for that question, because a little bit like our veins in our own body, if we look at the scaling in the water pipes as we look at our cholesterol inside our veins, then we can see here some similarity. What happens if we have our pipes fully corroded and we remove all of the scale that is actually isolating that from the inside? So if we remove that layer of scale, what we will probably end up with a very thin and fragile pipework that can start breaking and leaking. That was one of the situations that Langelier was faced, because the pipes, although they were very new, they started leaking and causing many problems. So that is one of the aspects. So like everything in life, if we go drastically from minus to plus, or from like we say from 8 to 80 in just one go, there are some side effects and some side results. So answering your question, is it more beneficial to protect against corrosion or to protect against scaling? Well, I would say that both are not good. So we basically would need to look at this line as everything that is beyond a very negative or a very positive balance of this index is not good. So I would say that the answer, in my opinion, is none. It's not a question of protecting from becoming a corrosive water or a scaling water, but I would say we have to meet up and have the water balanced. And that is the goal. That is the trick in order to have our water systems protected and prepared. But like you saw, it depends also, and it can vary, it can differ if we are facing the hot summer or the frozen winter. Even having the water chemically balanced in the same way, especially when we are dealing with pool water, for instance. With pool water, this factor here of the temperature has a very, very big influence. So imagine that we are in the midst of the summer and the water temperature is about 28 degrees Celsius. And then when we face the winter, we have the water with around 10 degrees or even less than that. Then that means that the chemical composition of the water can be the same, but it can start biting on the grouts. What are the grouts? The grouts are the space in between the tiles. Why? Because if the water becomes aggressive, then it starts eating and excavating on those grouts. So just to give you an example. And of course, in our drinking water, the same happens. When we are in the midst of the summer, the water temperature is different and higher than in the cold winter. So that is what I would have to say to that. So basically, it's just like when you are just about to step in your car for a long journey, it's good to test and recheck the pressure of your tires. And the pressure will have to be according to the load that we're going to put in the car. So we have to repressure or lower the pressure of the tires according to what we are going to do. And the same goes to our water facilities. So that's why I say most of us have, luckily, the public infrastructure serving us a water that is already balanced. And why is this water already balanced in most occasions? Is because if they wouldn't, they would have severe problems in their water treatment plots beforehand. Okay, so normally the water is already balanced and before reaching to our mains water taps. But when it comes to having our own water resources, whether it's from a well, a spring, a borehole, or collecting from the rain, speaking of that, imagine that we have a rainwater harvesting system that then we filter the water, we disinfect that water, and then we think that we are ready to go and that we have the best water in the world. Well, yes and no, because we have to be aware that these phenomenon are also happening in a water that has a very low or almost zero calcium factor, and also a very low or almost zero total dissolved solids. So that means that also the alkalinity of that water can have a big role in that point. So it depends, and it depends that depends on what kind of water system we are dealing with, and that we are dealing with a resource called water that is um, actually a combination of multiple elements that play along in order to be a healthy water for us. So that is a very good question. Thank you for that, and I hope that I could be of service with my answer. One other question is, what are the most common mistakes that I see when Langelier is not considered from the start? Good question. Thank you. And one of the big mistakes that I see is that when people just go blindly in and think that, for instance, especially where I'm located now in the south of Portugal, where we have a high calcium rate in most of the underground water, I see water softeners that use salt ion resins um, in many places, and that plumbers or installers are just one size fit all, and without questioning and without even standing still if what they are installing is the right answer. Well, sometimes it's not, and so that is one of the common mistake that I come across. And then when I ask the owner or the client what was the reason for installing that equipment, the answer is we don't know. So that is a common mistake. So I believe that, and that is what I've been learning with also my own mistakes, is that we can jump too fast into a conclusion regarding what is the best subject, what is the best equipment, or what is the best solution. But I think it's time for us all to do a step back and just get a proper analysis and invest in the proper information, invest in a good water test in a laboratory that can give us and you the right answer to your needs. And I believe that that is the start. And just to bring this back a little bit to our physical health, when we have a tooth pain, we don't go immediately to the doctor saying that we need a painkiller. Well, the painkiller is just to remove the symptom. But I believe that although we can bring down the pain, I believe that we need to search for a specialist and do the proper diagnosis before jumping into conclusions. And sometimes the answers and the solutions, if they are well diagnosed before, they can prevent a lot of unnecessary errors and unnecessary expenses. So I believe that being diagnosed first and doing all of the research that we can have at our um, reach is the better answer in order to do the best treatment. Another question that I'm receiving here is, if you had to explain Langelier to a client in 60 seconds, what would you say? Wow. I don't believe that even Langelier could answer that question in 60 seconds, but I'm going to do my best. Um, the Langelier index, saturation index, is a formula that measures if the combination of some determined uh, aspects of the water elements are transforming that water into a corrosive or into a scale forming water as a result of the water usage. So the Langelier Saturation Index, the name says saturation index. It's an index that calculates saturation. What is saturation? Imagine that you are feeding yourself and you are only eating a certain type of food, like, for instance, carbohydrates, and you are not eating the necessary vitamins or the enzymes or the proteins um, in order to have a balanced food in your body, and you are only saturating yourself with one type of foods, then I believe that the common knowledge and the common sense will say that you are going to be saturated with what you are putting in. And everything that is too much has to be taken off, or it's going to create a blockage or some damage in the future. So the same goes to the water. So if we have an out of balance saturation index, means that we are saturating something in our pipes, in our water, in our equipment. We are saturating it with something that can be on the negative side or on the positive side, both damaging our facilities and our equipment. So I hope I was not measuring the time, but I hope that I could answer this in approximately 60 seconds in order to explain what is the saturation index. The name says it all, saturation. Like here, if you are reaching a saturation point of hearing about this subject, well, then you can do two things. Either keep it up, ask me to change subject, or move to a different channel, which I hope you're not doing. So I believe that that I could answer your question. I'm receiving here some greetings also from some Portuguese viewers, and I hope that I could give you the best answer to your needs. So in order to rephrase this and bring back to the reality nowadays, it's this, and that is my own experience. And now I'm going to speak for as I work nowadays. But before I explain that, I'm going to explain you how I came this concept across. And back many years ago, I was doing installations of water systems, and I had one particular client that was served both from city water as well as from his own borehole. But the borehole, the underground water, needed to be treated. Well, and like many others, I thought, okay, if I analyze this water and the water has high hardness, calcium hardness, and it needs to be treated, so I'm going to treat this water. Well, it's simple. So pre-filter, water softener, and after a water softener, the water goes into a tank, gets the right doses of chlorine, and ready to go. Happy days, and we are in business. Well, so said, so done. And I installed that equipment. And it did not take much more than a couple of weeks of the water being used in that house, brand new house, with brand new top of the line stainless steel faucets where you take off the water, and some spots of corrosion were appearing and coming up to light. in these new taps. So immediately the client asks me, Rui, what is wrong with my water? Because this is corroding the stainless steel, one of the best brands of stainless steel faucets that he had in his bathroom. So I was alarmed by it and I questioned my supplier of the equipment. And this is another question or another issue. When we as installers do not have the right information in order to do the right advice on what kind of equipment we would advise for that particular installation, we just go blindly and we just pick one of the market and we install a water softener like I did in order to fulfill the needs. And indeed, it resulted in a way that the calcium was brought down from around 600 milligram per liter, brought down to practically zero. So I thought, well, that's a success. And indeed, it's a success for that equipment. But what it was causing, it was bringing the Langelier Saturation Index into a very corrosive point. Well, what my supplier did is he asked me to fly over a sample, a bottle of the raw water before the water softener and one bottle of after the softener. As a result of that experiment, they analyzed the Langelier index of both samples. And to my surprise, the water before going through the softener was not aggressive. It was a bit scale forming, but the one after the softener was severely corrosive. So that was for me an alert like, oh, I need to know what this index means and what I need to do to prevent problems in the future. So the answer to that installation that I initially did on that subject had to be taken back. And nowadays, the client is using exclusively city water for his house, where the Langelier index is not creating any issue. And the borehole is exclusively being used for the garden and for washing the pavement and the road. So that means that sometimes thinking that I have my own water, so I'm going to use my own water in spite of everything else, and I have my source of water, sometimes the treatment needs a little bit more attention than just simply, like I did in the beginning, just go blindly. Okay, if we have lime scale, we reduce it, we eliminate it with a salt softener ion exchange filter. Well, in many of the cases, that's the case. Some of the occasions, it's not that simple. So I hope I could bring a little bit more awareness into this subject. So if you have any other questions, I would be able to respond in the next minutes, as we are almost reaching to 1 hour of our first interactive live on YouTube in order to explain and give answers to some common issues that most of the people are not aware of yet. So that's my job. That's why I wanted to bring this particular subject for this first live as being here ready for you. Not that when we are on Instagram, we can also you can also send questions and we will register it. But on Instagram, we do a different concept where we are more dealing and approaching subjects from me to you. And here I am actually doing the reverse. I'm giving you the feedback that you have or that you may have according to sometimes, like we brought today, some particular subject. Okay, so I bring up one subject, one theme, but it does not mean that the whole life will have to be hanging on that subject. Okay, so like it was today, of course, this is a very complex subject. I admit, and because it's not easy to answer, and sometimes when I bring this up to clients, they, because they were never informed about this before, they look at me as we would look at an alien if he would come down now from a space shuttle and start communicating with us in a different language. And for many people, this subject here is in the water treatment for many people a different language because it's using physics, mathematics with natural elements that are inside the water that we are putting through our pipes and into our equipment. So thank you. Thank you all. And we're going to announce you our next live on YouTube, which will be on the second Thursday of each month. So that will be in February. The second Thursday, 1700 hours, will be here in your office, not my office. So hope you have a great year ahead. 2026 is starting up. So let's make it a great year for us all. Thank you. See you in the next live.